So let's dive straight into how stress affects your weight loss and affects your libido, especially as a guy. We'll go through individual things first in terms of what's important for you to know, and then we'll look at the signs in terms of what to look out for yourself in terms of what's happening, and then some things that you can do to move you in the right direction. Right. So first of all, what you need to know is that stress has been found to lower testosterone. It lowers testosterone in men, and men with low testosterone experience more anxiety and experience more stress. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You push yourself down into one direction where you start feeling stressed and you drive it down, but then the fact that you're stressed and you're anxious also keeps you down there, right? And obviously, if you know a little bit about testosterone, it plays quite a significant role in your libido, and it plays quite a significant role in muscle retention, but also fat loss, right? And muscle gain. Now, that also means that if you're going through a phase of fat loss and your levels aren't great, then you may experience a greater loss in muscle tissue, which obviously you're not looking for. An important thing to bear in mind is that stress isn't just something that happens suddenly, right? You go into a meeting, you feel stressed, you have a call, it makes you feel stressed. Rumination, as in thinking about the things that are stressful, has a very similar impact. That means that if you're lying in bed and you're thinking about your workday the next day and what's happening, you'll experience the same symptoms as if you were going through that thing, which you probably felt, right? You feel the increase in tension and pressure and anxiety, all those kind of things. So rumination is an important part. So when you go through the actual solutions, one of the really important things is how do you deal with the actual rumination, with the actual thought process of stress in line with stress. So you might be wondering why it affects fat loss. Right now, the way that stress happens is you release stress hormones. All you need to know is things like cortisol, which you may or may not have heard of, which is a stress hormone. These kind of things, these kind of hormones are catabolic a lot of the time. Catabolic meaning they break down tissue, right? And anabolic is things that build tissue. Catabolic is things that break down tissue. And that also means that they impact things like your ability to absorb glucose, so essentially sugar in your blood, and also amino acids, which are essentially the breakdown or the building blocks, if you will, of protein. So ultimately, what you're experiencing is a degradation, a breakdown of muscle tissue, but also other kinds of protein in your body. Obviously, that's not a great thing. There is a big difference, though, between different types of stress. You have acute and you have chronic stress, right? Acute stress is something that's sudden, it's short in duration, and it can be something like a workout. Because if you train, your body experiences stress during that phase, right? But it uses that stress for you to progress afterwards, for you to get better. Chronic stress is what really causes the issue. Chronic stress is short-term, almost low-grade, you could say, stress, right? It's things that are recurring on a day-to-day basis. Every day you're feeling a little bit stressed, and you try and find ways to deal with that stress that you feel, right, or the anxiety that you feel. So we can move on to sort of the coping mechanisms. Now, it's important that you understand what coping mechanisms you have, because then you can actually pay attention to what you're doing and what direction you need to move in to get yourself away from going further down the rabbit hole of sort of chain of downsides of experiencing stress, right, on a long-term basis. So one of them is anger. It's anger. It can be in person, or frazzled, or confusion, that kind of thing. And obviously, you see this in things like road rage. Most people that don't experience a lot of stress probably don't experience road rage in the same sense. A lot of times, people that have stress or have stress, anxiety build up, sort of have outbursts, right, in certain situations. But it doesn't just have to happen in person. Right? It doesn't mean that you have a discussion with someone and suddenly someone overreacts. It can also be on social media, right? You can see, people do this all the time on social media. You've probably seen this. People commenting with, just pointless comments, pointless, angry, anything to basically get the other person riled up, or maybe just make themselves feel better. But it's the same thing, right? It's an expression of anger, of frustration, of anxiety. So this happens all the time. Another one. So obviously, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay out two that people don't usually think about. One of them is the second one, obviously, is perfectionism. And this is super common in things like in the kind of people that are businessmen, right, entrepreneurs, people that are high performers, if you will. And it can be in anything, right? It can be work, it can be overdoing it in work and pushing yourself into stress without feeling like you're stressed. I've been there myself. I know lots of people that have gone through this situation where super motivated, or they push really hard because they have a particular goal, and they almost don't realize that they're experiencing stress on a chronic level. And you can also do this in fitness, right? You can do this in fitness by being overly obsessed with a particular diet, overly obsessed with certain foods, overly obsessed with training hard, right? There's a limit between what your body can handle and what it needs, the rest it needs to be able to recuperate, right? To recover. So you need to, if you're someone who has that kind of outlook on life, who's always trying to be perfect or pushing harder and harder and harder, it's worth considering the impact that it's having on you. And are you actually improving, or are things slowly crumbling sort of behind the scenes? You need a certain element, or you need a certain amount of downtime to be able to recover, time to relax, time for your body to go back to its normal state, right? You can't always be up here and expect to be up here for the rest of your life, because eventually things will break down, and that's when basically shit hits the fan, right? So what can you do to actually deal with these issues? Now, obviously, you want to point out some other ones that are quite common. Binge eating, eating late at night, use of porn, use of alcohol, use of drugs. A lot of these things are coping mechanisms. Right now, these are obviously the more common ones that people usually know that they're doing, but these are also issues, right? If you're reaching to those things to try and make your life feel more relaxed and feel better, you've got issues going on. Right? You have things that need to change for you to actually move in a positive direction and improve. So what are the things you can do? If we're talking about the eating aspect, what most of us do is when we have dinner, when we have food, when we have lunch, is we just sit in front of a screen, we look at our phone, and we eat almost subconsciously. Eating slowly, taking time to enjoy the food, and taking a moment to not be bombarded by things from all different sides is an important way for you to bring the level down a bit, right? Spend that time like people used to do with your family or with friends, with colleagues, or go for a walk or do something after your lunch to bring yourself down a notch. Right? You don't need constant input. We don't need constant input to make ourselves feel good. We can train ourselves in a negative sense, right? To need it. We can go through that in a different episode. But taking that time to actually appreciate the food and feel how you feel in terms of when you're full will make a big difference, because when you're doing things like looking at screens, looking at your phone, that kind of thing, you can eat way more than you normally would, because you're missing out on that sort of stretch reflex in the stomach, right? That tells you when you're full. You can just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's very, very easy to overeat in that kind of situation. There's lots of things you can do, but another one that's quite substantial for a lot of people, everyone has different methods. Now, some people use a diary and they write down their thoughts and those kind of things. Some people make special time. Meditation is one that works for a lot of people in terms of setting goals, but also getting calm, right? Just bringing yourself down, relaxing, realizing what's actually going on in your life, and then being able to adjust in a more balanced sense from there on. And then obviously there's any methods, such as meditation to an extent, that allow you to adapt your thoughts, your thought process, the way you experience things, the way that you view things in life. Because a lot of the time when things happen, let's say you're in an argument with someone, you're arguing with a family member, the thing that they're saying isn't necessarily what you're hearing, right? You hear something and you automatically interpret it as something, but it doesn't mean that they mean it exactly the way as you're hearing it, right? It might sound confusing, but just because you see something a certain way doesn't mean it actually is that way. So when you experience a situation where you're feeling more stressed or something happens and it puts you in a situation where you're feeling negative emotions, let's say, about that, take a moment to reflect before you react. Those 1 or 2 seconds, those 3 seconds would make a big difference in terms of thinking, you know what? Am I overreacting? Do I need to respond to this? Am I 100% certain that the way that I'm currently interpreting this is exactly what they're saying, right? Or exactly what I'm reading on social media, or if you're on social media, because a lot of people get really angry, right, or really upset, or really frustrated after looking at social media. An important thing to bear in mind is most of what you hear on social media are just the people that are loudest, right? It's not actually a reflection of real life. So once you know all these things and you figure out where you're at in terms of your coping mechanisms and things that work for you in terms of moving you in a positive direction, your stress levels will come down, your testosterone will go up, losing weight will be easier, you'll feel better overall, you'll have a better libido, you'll have a better relationship with family members, with your wife, with your partner, whatever it is. But it's important for you to pay attention to this, because this is a really overlooked part in terms of your fitness and your health journey.